Hello, and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. And when I first decided I wanted to do this, I decided that I just really like having interesting conversations with interesting people about interesting ideas. And there wasn't really any particular specific topic that I wanted to cover. There wasn't a specific person that I wanted to talk to. I just missed long form conversations that went immediate and went deep and were just not the kind of what'd you do with your summer vacation kind of conversation, mostly because none of us had summer vacations this year in the time of COVID. So here we are. And my guest today is absolutely one of the most interesting people that I met over the course of the last couple of years. And it's not just me who thinks he's super interesting. Bill Gates thinks he's interesting. Malcolm Gladwell thinks he's interesting. Adam Grant thinks he's interesting. Tim Ferriss thinks he's interesting. His book, Loonshots, has been one of the biggest books of 2019 and has recently just come out in paperback. And it's all about how teams, just these wonderful, well positioned, really just like of service teams, kill the great ideas that can create innovation. And we spent all this time talking about how culture is so important, culture. And it turns out that a lot of the things that we're doing to build the culture and incentivize people are actually stopping them from having the best ideas come to light. So I wanted to have a conversation with Safi Bachall today to just talk about how we actually find our way through time when really interesting and really creative ideas are more important than ever. So, Safi, welcome to this random experiment that I'm calling Big Talk.
Thanks. Delighted to be on your show, Laura. And I have to say, I also met a ton of people over the last couple of years. And when we met, I think it was in London.
It was in London.
And we had these like really deep, intense bonding conversations, many of which were PG-13, some of which crossed the line a little bit. That's another subject for another talk about family relations. You also really stood out as one of the most interesting people I met in the last couple of years. So I'm delighted to be on your show, have a conversation, and I just want to say, ground rules. We agreed, quid pro quo.
I
know.
You
can ask me questions, but quid pro quo, I'm going to be asking you some back.
So I believe very deeply that a good offense is a good defense. And so I've spent the last 20 years interviewing people. Like I became a headhunter, right? I'm like your prototypical Jewish mother, and I'm all about the offense. So you're the only person that I was willing to agree to let do that. So, to do that and to do that live is like, it's a little terrifying for me. So I'm going to start then. I'm just going to go right in and I'm going to ask you the prototypical Jewish mother question. You're a physicist and you are the son of two physicists, and your sister and your brother also have PhDs, and you're not just like the child of two physicists. Like your mother, her calculations about the mass of the universe are huge. Your father helped create the Hubble telescope and establish the standard solar model. Like they're like big, bold-faced physicists. So you graduate and then you go into consulting. Like, were you a disappointment?
Wow, Laura. I've done a lot of podcasts, but no one has known that about my brother and sister, which is true, about the research that my mother did, which is true. Wow, you or your team.
Really I do my homework. I'm curious.
Someone really does
humans.
Someone really does homework over there. Yes, I did switch out of academic science in my late 20s. I think I was, 29 or 30, and I had never stepped off a university. My parents were at Princeton University, and I was in college and then grad school and then postdoc and all the way going to career.
And you were studying math at 13 on the Princeton campus. Like it's not just college. There was a trajectory.
Yeah, wow, you really don't know. Now I'm afraid what's going to come up later in the show.
I'm stalking you. Yeah.
Now and you know what? I was going through your book, Laura, which is terrific. And in your opening discussion, you talk about something you call consonants, aligning. Let me explain your stuff to you. No, I'm just kidding. But it really stood out to me because that's the answer to your question of what happened to me in my late 20s. I had been one of these folks patted on the back, going down this direction, studied math, physics from a very young age, and was good at it. Whether nature or nurture is hard to know, but I was certainly trained in that as a very young age, and did very well in that, and got all the sort of usual kind of very nice recognitions and rewards and encouragements, which is sort of like a carrot, and that makes you keep going and find, what's the best college, what's the best grad school, what's the best program, what are the best awards, what are the best, journals to get into, what are the best kind of papers you could publish. And then in my late 20s, I just started to wonder. I just kept feeling a little frustrated. Something felt off. I found myself, at my desk in front of papers, having to force myself to study this or to study that. And I realized that, the thing that has driven me kind of for most of my life is curiosity, really wanting to learn more. And theoretical physics has reached a little bit of a plateau after the 70s and 80s, some incredible century for theoretical physics. But the last couple decades, there hasn't been as much progress. And once you learn the field, you just sort of get stuck in this area, and the progress has been very slow. And I really missed solving puzzles. It became very mathematical, and I like trying to understand how the world works. So I realized that seems to be true that 99.99% of the people on the planet are not theoretical physicists. They don't write papers and grant proposals and referee papers and go to conferences about, lasers and spectroscopy and quarks and gluons and string theory. What do they do? Like when they wake up? Yeah, that's one example. Back to our PG, not so 13 discussions. But what do they do? Like they get up in the morning. What's this thing called a job? I didn't quite understand. And they go to an office building. I'd never been inside an office building. What does someone in an office building do? I just didn't get it. I was dating a woman at the time, and she was a paralegal. I was in my mid-20s or something, and I said, "What do the people you work with do?" She was at some famous law firm in Silicon Valley, Wilson Sonsini or something. And she tried to explain it to me, and it was like, blah, 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 blah. I don't get it. So she took me into her office building on a Friday afternoon. I guess it was a happy hour. And I went around and asked these lawyers, like, what do you do? And then I just asked a sort of a straightforward question. Are you happy? And I asked probably 13 people, and 13 out of 13 said no. Mm-hmm. I was like, well, that's it. I'm sticking with academia. So I stayed with academia for another 5 years.
But were they no, but I like the money. No, but I like the access. No, but there's like, was it at least a means to an end, or were they just like sunk cost? I went to law school, so I'm going to stay, and believing that was it.
Well, I think it's a lot of very similar to what you wrote about with that consonants idea, and where I was with physics, just two different tracks. They didn't really know what they want to do, but they were bright and driven and ambitious. So if you don't know what exactly you want to do, why don't, and you're in college, how about major in law? It can't hurt because you can do a lot of stuff. Great. Now I get to the end of college. I still don't really know what I want to do, but I majored in law. Maybe I'll go to law school. And let me just try to get into the best law school and the best geography that fits with whatever. And that's kind of the carrot in front, dangling in front of your eyes. So you do that. And then they're like, I got into, blank law school. I got into 3. I'm going to pick this one. And now you're in a competition to get the best grade. So that's the carrot right in front of your face. And so you do that, then you graduate law school, and then it's about getting the best internship and, in your geography, and you align that, and the carrot's there, and you keep doing that. And then 3 years later, you wake up and you're like, why?
Yes.
Why am I doing this? So that's that moment. And for me, that happened a little bit in the late 20s when I was like, why am I doing this theoretical physics, which I am good at, and I'm being rewarded, and people are patting me on the back, but the field, I'm not really that satisfied, because I like solving real world puzzles and mysteries. And this is veering off into just pure mathematics. So I decided to get this consulting job, which was one of the very rare consulting firms that takes in kooks who studied got physics PhDs and didn't know anything about business. I didn't even know how to balance a check. I didn't balance checkbooks. I didn't really care about money. And I'd never worn a suit since my bar mitzvah. And I remember going into this final interview in New York, and they call you up, and it was kind of exciting. They're going to buy you a plane ticket to go to New York. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I didn't have a suit. And so I asked a friend, where do you go? And he gave me the name of this store. And I went in, and it was like this magical store filled with these incredibly awesome, expensive clothing and ties. It was called the Men's Warehouse. And I was like, this is incredible. I'm going to knock them dead. These suits cost like $90. That's like 10 burritos. I'm a Mission Street here. I get burrito, not 10 burritos. It's like 10 full meals, like a burrito and a good drink and chips on the side and salsa. You're
taking the paralegal out for a night out.
Yeah, I get like a $90 suit. I might even splurge and get like a $13 tie. I am gonna rock this, So I fly to New York. For this interview, and I'm walking. I totally remember this oddly, like it was yesterday, even though it was like 2 decades ago. I'm walking down Park Avenue in Manhattan. And I'd never been to, Park Avenue in Manhattan, it's street, and it's like around lunchtime, and there are all these people, and it's it's the winter, and I have my, fancy $90 Men's Warehouse suit on, and
in my mind, you're like strutting down the seat, like bam, ba bam, ba bam, like you're strutting down the street, and
right.
Like people are turning their heads, and it's like a scene out of Working Girl, except it's you and not Melanie Griffith. Like that's the visual that I'm having in my brain.
Except there was one thing off. I looked around. And all these people are wearing like these what I didn't know is sort of the standard uniform at the time, these like blue cashmere, very fancy coats on top of their nice suit. And I didn't realize that you needed a decent coat. So I had my beat up old ski jacket with like ski tags and like spilled soda and like a smoothie, ice cream dripping, and, like a hot dog stain over here. And on top of my fancy suit, I was like, oh yeah, I guess you need the thing that goes outside, Tad. I just didn't know that. And so I show up at the office building. This was McKinsey Company Management consulting firm in New York. And I'm wearing this, I look like a homeless guy who just, came off was sleeping at a ski lodge or something, on top of a Men's Warehouse, really nice first class suit. And so I was like, I sort of put two and two together. I realized, oops, this doesn't look good. And so I tried to roll up that coat into like a scrunch it up, right? And put it casually under my arm like this.
It's not like you had a nice, pouch. You had like a backpack probably with you, right?
Same thing, like a backpack, like any grad student or postdoc walks around with. And then I have this giant ski jacket rolled up, and I walk into the office, and they're like, "Huh, you're Safi Bachall, that's what is that you have there?" And I'm like, nothing. Do you have a closet I can shove this into? Anyway, so yes, when I left that world, I didn't know anything about that world. And when I told my parents about it, they reacted with sort of the shock and horror and sort of the 5 stages of grief that I was abandoning this promising career that they had kind of seen me in their mind pursuing. And I had assumed that for myself too, when you're young, you're very influenced by your parents and others' expectations around you, or at least I was. So they reacted not so well, tried to talk me out of it for a couple of years, going into the business world. What do these people do in this business world with their jobs and their office buildings? So it was.
And their money.
Their money. Why does that matter? What do you need? A better car? Who cares? What are you talking about?
It's about the purity of the idea.
Yeah. So it's not about the search for truth. It's about the search for money. And why would you want to do that? Yeah. Anyway, so, but, they gradually realized that there's sort of more to it. And especially after I left consulting, I went into biotech and started a company used both skills, the science and the business, to help start a company developing new drugs for cancer. Then they're like, oh, oh, okay, now you're sort of back in the fold, back in the faith of science. But we see like you learned some skills that can do some good. And so that mattered.
Yeah. So it's like the sort of happy medium, right? Between
Yeah.
you're doing good, but you're also doing well. Like you're pursuing the idea, but that's okay, right? Like
But now
you're
you're doing well. And it's a combination of the search for truth. But more than that, in academia, you're really about originality in your papers and your resume. And that in and of itself, at the end of the day, I realized was not as satisfying to me as doing something that could, say, help people spend more time on Earth with their loved ones.
Yeah.
If you develop new drugs or new treatments, which is what we ended up doing, you may give some families more time on Earth with mother, father, brother, sister. So that was much more meaningful to me than either helping big companies get more successful, which is what you do as a consultant, or in academia, you are searching for truth, but you're really focused just on your originality, which can be fun and can be exciting and can be important. But what I found was satisfying, or back to your phrase, more consonant for me, was when I could combine all of those, business, science, and doing some good. And when those came together, it really hit home. It really rang a bell for me. And so that's what I ended up doing for the next 13 or 14 years.
I used to explain to people how I ran my business the way that I ran it. And every time, and these were usually like old white dudes, but every time they'd be like, but don't you realize how much money you're leaving on the table? Like there's so many things you could be doing differently. And I'm like, I know. Like that's part of what I'm doing, is I'm doing it this way on purpose so that I can do more of the things that I love and less of what I don't. And I could have made so much more money using the exact same skill set to find the CEO of Coca-Cola or Hilton hotel chains, but I would have hated it. Like the fact that I got to spend 20 years listening to why people did what they did. I got to hear the stories of, the diagnosis or the real tragedy or the event or the mother, the teacher, the nurse, the somebody in their life who sent them on this path, that for them to see the world as one way and have it be the other way, just made it made the work so much more fulfilling. And I made enough money, right? Like there's like this sort of like, what do you want to make and what do you need to make? And they're two different numbers. And we all need to get to the need to make number, because unfortunately burritos do cost some money. Sometimes you need more than a $90 suit. But there is then also the want to make number. And in between the space of the need to make number and the want to make number is how you decide you want to live your life. Like how much time do you want to spend with your kids, with your spouse? How much time do you want to spend learning how to play the ukulele, or like whatever the thing is that you actually care about doing? And it seems like it's quite mystifying to so many people that the sort of bigger, better, faster, more, make all the money you can isn't an incentive that works for all of us. And what I love about, so many things I love about Loonshots, but one of the things that I love is how you talk a lot about this moment of phase transition in physics, but also about phase transition in organizations, where it's sort of like the startups. Like I had the startup, I could have gone from this company that was innovating and changing the way that the nonprofit sector was thinking about how this particular set of services was delivered to them, and then become the sort of old clunky organization that was just incentivizing people, for like their stake and their outcome, or like the perk of the rank that they had. It was hard. It was really hard to fight to keep the organization in this startup mentality, when everybody in it was like, you keep tinkering around with the engine. Can we just take it out on the road and see how fast we can drive it? Because we understand perks, the perk of rank, and we understand the stake and outcome. And this whole thing that you're doing feels weird and squishy and mysterious.
Right.
So how do I know you talk a ton about how companies can do it. How do we as individuals hold ourselves in that place and fight to retain the importance of the structure, when everything we're hearing from the outside is, culture, smart business thinking, and our people are like, give me the things I understand, because that's clear and it makes sense. How do we tell people, how do we stay there?
I will tell you the superpower, one word.
Yeah.
But first, Quid pro quo, Clarice.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Did I say Clarice? I meant Laura.
Bring it on.
Quid pro quo, Clarice. I'm curious about your transition, how you went from 20 years executive search and what made you. And so I looked in the introduction, the dedication to your book, you dedicated it to someone named Arnie Miller, who helped you.
Yes.
Can you tell me, what was it that Arnie Miller did for you? What did you learn from him, and how did that influence your transition?
Oh, such a good question. When Limitless came out, I did like 150 podcasts and, TV and everything. And nobody ever asked me about the dedication, which is such a good question. But before I tell you about Arnie, I have to tell you about Eli. So
Okay.
I went to go work in the Clinton White House as like basically my first big job for a man named Eli Siegel. And Eli ran the Office of National Service, which is where we created AmeriCorps, the National Community Service Program. And Eli ran the 92 campaign for Bill Clinton. So that's how he ended up there.
I see.
In the McGovern campaign, Eli ran the McGovern campaign, which lost because, who remembers President McGovern, right? But so Eli ran the McGovern campaign, and he hired a guy by the name of Arnie Miller to run all the state operations. And Arnie Miller hired a young couple named Bill and Hillary Clinton to run Texas. So that's sort of how the whole universe comes together. Now, I've had two bosses in my life, Eli and Arnie. My first book is dedicated to Eli because Eli taught me that you can do good and also do well. He was never in politics. I mean, he was never in public service, but he was always in politics. And he ran private sector companies his whole life. Interestingly enough, that sold puzzles and games. He would have loved it. And he died very young from mesothelioma. And so I dedicated my first book to him. Then when I was working there, I got to the point where I was ready to get back out on the campaign trail. And I was like, Eli, I'm ready. Let's go. And he basically said, you're too old to get back on a campaign bus and eat cold pizza, and you're too young to be the domestic policy advisor. So go talk to my friend Arnie Miller, who does executive search for nonprofits. You'll hide out for 4 years, then come back and do something, big in the Gore campaign. So I went to go talk to Arnie, who was going to go find me a job in the nonprofit sector. And at the time, I had been dating the guy who I thought was the one, who I've now been married to for over 20 years. He was about to move to Boston because he was going to pursue a PhD in economics. And I was like, wait a minute, your job's in Boston. You work in Boston. I should just come work for you. And he's like, you should. And I was like, great. What do you do? And that's how I became a headhunter. So I worked for him for 5 years, and I really learned like the best way to do this work, like just so smart, so dedicated, so like bringing everything you do to everything to your clients every single day, because they deserve no less than your very best. Like if you put the wrong person in a position, you're not only stopping that organization from figuring out the next big innovation or the next big service delivery need, you are not putting them where they should be, and they could do even better somewhere else. And you're actually harming that organization. So it's like double harm. And he really drilled that home. Like it wasn't just doing enough. It was going over every single time, because our clients deserve no less. And he drilled that into me so deeply. But I also hated the way that the model of search, the 1/3 first year's cash compensation. And I walked into his office one day and I was like, there has to be a better way. Here's the way. Because I had come up with this idea of like how we could do it that was like better and more innovative and had more authenticity to who we were.
What was the idea? I've been paying, 1/3 of first year comp for 15 years for search. What was the idea?
What I said was like, if the Kellogg Foundation, for example, wants to hire us as a chief strategy officer, well, okay, we can do that search. The position pays $300K. We'll get $100,000 fee. Awesome. A local domestic violence shelter is going to pay like $60,000 for their, director of fundraising, director of development, and our minimum fee is, 30. So they're still going to pay us $30,000. Which one of those searches is harder? The director development search by far. And yet I'm incentivized to do the work for the Kellogg Foundation and this organization, which I would argue the money is so much more important to them. And they need the help so much more. They're getting the last 5% of my time any given day because I'm incentivized right? To do this work, like going back to what you were talking about. I'm incentivized to do the work for them. So what I said was, what if we figured out a way where we could unpack the entire process and charge our clients by the complexity, but also help them figure out a way to get funded so that the capacity stays in house longer. And so we were able to break the entire search down, which is like 300 to 400 hours, figure out what parts of the search the organizations need, what parts they can do themselves, what parts we can teach them, and then what parts we can get the Kellogg Foundation to fund them to do it. And so we were able to help our clients we were partners to them rather than saying, we're going to do the search and we're going to do 1/3 first year's cash compensation, and we're going to give you a guarantee so that if anything goes wrong, we redo the search. We go, you know what? We're going to break it down. We were going to be partners. You're going to okay things every step of the way. We're going to teach you what we're doing so that you know how to do this later. And you have access to all the people we talk to. So it's not just like black box, you never get to see. And then when you need someone else, you call us again. And because of that, we're not going to actually give you a guarantee because you're going to be on the path with us, unless there's something we really should have known, but we failed to do. Like if somebody has a heart attack the first week into the job, that's not on us. We couldn't have known. But if they had a heart attack 13 times in the last 3 years, it's illegal to take health into consideration. But if they're not able to do their job because they've had a heart attack 13 times in the last 3 years, that's probably something that should have come up in the reference checks, right? So like that's on us. In 15 years of running the firm, we redid 2 searches. Those are the only searches. We only had to redo 2 searches. Those are the only ones that went wrong. And we placed more people of color. We placed more women. We placed more LGBT candidates than traditional firms because we de-risked them. It wasn't like, we'll do this. Like a traditional firm, they charge you this huge fee, and then they do they do the guarantee, which means they're not incentivized to bring you different, innovative, diverse, etc. They're incentivized to bring you the same as you've always seen. So how do we expect innovation to come when we're bringing the same as we've always seen? And so that was the model. And people would say, that's crazy. You're teaching them how to do it. They don't need you anymore. I'd be like, the need is endless. Like we did not, our firm grew 100% every year. But when I went into his office and I was like, I don't think we're part of the solution, which means that we're part of the problem. Here's the new way. He was like, there's the door. You could either stay and do it my way, or you can leave and do it your way. And I'm a problem solver like you. I'm a puzzle solver. So for me, it was untenable to stay in this position where I knew that there was a better way to do it, but I wasn't doing it. And so I left, and I had, I got like, I was like a billion months pregnant, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. And then I had 24 hours of labor and an unplanned C-section. And I was sitting at my kitchen table with like baby in arms, Dalmatian at my feet, not really knowing my head from my ass or who I was. And a friend of mine from back in the White House days, we both worked for Eli, called me up and said, ew, so I heard you had a baby. Really? Okay. Anyway, our CEO just left. I know you used to do search. Are you still doing it? Would you do our search? And I was like, sure. And she goes, what are you going to charge me? And I was like, $100 an hour. And she was like, great. Send me a contract. So I like opened up my laptop and with one hand pecked out like how to write a professional services contract. That's how I founded the firm.
Wow.
Crazy. Wow. And the transition out of that was because I got to a point where I hadn't learned anything new in a while. Like my firm, my staff was pushing to want to take the car out on the road. And I was really interested in the innovation question. And the reason I asked the question I asked you that you diverted me to this for is because I ended up losing that battle. I fought it for 10 years very successfully. And then I just kind of gave up because it just became too hard to try to continue to hold on to like sort of the structure and to push for innovation when what they really wanted was like, I just want to recognize, I want to know like if I produce this, I get that. Period. End of story. Because the work that we were doing was so hard that they wanted that part to be easy. So I turned to my partner and I said, I I think we need to have a transition. Like this firm doesn't need somebody who loves the idea of innovating and change and running the firm. It needs somebody who's super geeked out about the actual work that we're doing. And at that point, it was like physics. I was kind of bored of it. I didn't really want to do it anymore. So 5-year exit plan, all the stages of grief, all that stuff. And then I walked out the door at the end, and that was that. And the last tiny story I'll tell you, and then I want to get back to my question, is a few months after I sold it, I was the chair of an art auction here for Artcetera, local Boston AIDS Action organization. And I got introduced on stage by Janet Wu, the newscaster. And she was like, "Here's my dear friend, Laura. She dedicates her life to philanthropy." And I was like, oh my God. There's nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't it wasn't complete. I didn't, in that environment, which was like a ladies who lunch type of audience, I just didn't know if I wanted to stick my cocktail fork in my eyes or hers. But I knew it couldn't be. Couldn't be. So I went home that night and I bought the URL, lauragassnerotting.com, and I just started blogging about stuff. And a friend of mine, who's the executive producer of TEDx Cambridge, asked me if I would do a talk. And I was like, no fucking way. I don't want to speak in public. That's terrifying. And my then 14-year-old, now 18-year-old heard me and was like, Mom, don't you tell me I have to do hard things? So what gives? Fast forward 5 years, here I am. I make my living speaking on stages.
Wow. Transition.
Crazy transition, wow. Right?
I have more questions for you, but we've got a quid pro quo, so I know that I have more opportunities coming up. I have lots more questions for you. Okay, I will let you ask another one, but I want to know, what should I have done at that time, at that 10-year mark, where I couldn't fight the tidal wave of my managees wanting to be managed in a way that they recognized? What should I have done differently? Actually, that's my question for you. That was literally my next question, which is, you are now, it's kind of amazing, you've built up this LGO brand, and, there are a lot of speaker author types, but you're kind of a real entrepreneur at it and really going at it like a full court press with a real business. And when I first started as a CEO, this was, 20 years ago or so, I'd never run a business or a company. And so what I did was I went around, I was in my early 30s. I went around and asked every person I knew who was successful. And I was surrounded by a lot of very successful people who were a generation or two older than me. And I would ask them for lunch or for a drink or for a coffee. And I would ask them, what do you wish you'd done differently? That was it, just one question. And, this would be the CEO of X, or the, head of this investment fund, or the head of that thing, or, they'd had this long arc of a career. And one of the things that I'd learned was, it's not really interesting asking people about their successes, because it's kind of boring, because they're like, well, let me tell you about how great I am, or, how smart I was, or how dumb my competitors were. But in fact, it's almost impossible to separate luck, being in the right place at the right time, on successes. And some people, a very small number of people, are very good at being self-aware and probing and trying to tease out honestly what they might have done right and where actually was just luck. And actually, those are often the most successful, because they take the best lessons. They don't just look at the outcome. They look at the cause of the cause. What did they, even when they won, what did they win through luck? And they just got lucky. It's like you're playing soccer and you kick the ball directly at the goalie, and the goalie happened to slip on some wet mud and the ball went in. Well, you probably don't want to use that strategy again, kick the ball slowly right at the goalie, right? You want to tease out what was luck or what was real. And so I went around when I was in my early 30s and just asked all these CEOs and successful people, what do you wish you'd done differently? I probably learned the most from those conversations than anything else, because books are very often, certainly biographies are often, let me tell you about how great I was. but it's through their failures. That's when people tend to really analyze and really think. And in fact, this is now a digression on top of a digression, and we're coming back, but
I like it.
Stay with me. World War II.
Yes.
So I actually wrote a fair amount about World War II history. I love that stuff. And I actually just have been joining this class at Stanford remotely, which is fascinating. I haven't been in a classroom in 30 years about how to transform the military for the 21st century, taught by Steve, with some very distinguished people. 2 secretaries of defense are guest speakers. World War I. Allies win, Germany loses terribly. What happened afterwards? Well, afterwards, Britain, the US, the Allies, France sat back and said, great, we did a great job. Did nothing. Let go of science innovation, let go of technology innovation, let go of building up, of investing. Now, who analyzed carefully what happened? Nazi Germany.
Right.
They analyzed, we had these things in World War I, even though we ended up losing the war, we lost kind of in the land battle, but the Allies never found an answer to our U-boats, our submarines. We just kept sinking their ships. That's really interesting. What became the single greatest threat of World War II? The German
U-boats.
Submarines.
Right.
Where did they learn that? World War I. Who paid no attention to that fact? The Allies. The Allies had all the information. They understood that. There was a few people who were trying to sound the flag. They said, wait a minute, this U-boat stuff, that was pretty big. And P.S., there were all these kind of interesting innovations in that war that really made a difference. And between the First World War and the Second, the U.S. stopped investing in science and technology. Britain stopped investing in it. But who was saying, well, these technologies made a big difference? Nazi Germany. So who set back and learned from their failure? Nazi Germany.
Yes.
Where was the tank invented? The tank was invented, people think the Blitzkrieg, the German Panzer Division, which is what, wiped out Europe in a matter of a couple of weeks in the start of World War II in 1939, 1940. Where was that technology invented? Britain, Great Britain, World War I. And right afterwards, a number of people in the UK said, I think this tank thing, it was kind of we didn't get to use it that much. It was a new idea, a new technology at the time. But it seemed like it was making a big difference. What if we had a division of tanks? And what if they attacked really quickly enemy lines to throw enemies into confusion? Nothing. Ignored. Who took up that idea? Who learned the lesson? Nazi Germany. That's how they won. So when it comes back, when I started, I asked, what do you wish you'd done differently? Because people who are successful, if you ask them, that's, as you and I have been on a zillion podcasts, it's always about, oh, you're successful. What made you so great? Oh, let me tell you what made me so great. That's not really interesting. It's where did you fail? What lessons did you take from that failure? And keep pulling on that thread. And so when I was in my early 30s, that's what I did. I went around because that was a much more interesting question. And every now it really divides people. I was speaking with a guy who's, reasonably well known for some stuff, even though the company he started was a giant .com failure. I'm not going to mention the names unless, there's a 2-drink minimum for that story. But he's pretty full of himself. And he had written some book or two, and we were somehow sitting next to each other at some event. And I asked him, and I had known that his company was this almost like one of these a poster childs for disasters. All sorts of stuff happened. And I asked him the same question I had asked a lot of other successful people. Oh, do you wish you'd done anything differently? What do you wish you'd done differently? Nothing. It was brilliant. It was genius. It was like, wow, no wonder you keep failing. Because the best people that I interviewed would spend lots of time and energy on, well, this didn't work, and that didn't work, and this other thing didn't work, and kind of here's what I took from that, and here's what and I was like, this is priceless.
Yes.
So that was going to be my question for you. You made this kind of amazing, you were kind of an incredible entrepreneur, started your own agency, probably reasonably young while you have a kid and pregnant. I'm a relatively new dad, so I know how insane that is, especially for the mom. Not as much for the dad, but much more so for the mom. So you started a whole new agency with a whole new set of ideas for speaking, which is a huge need in the corporate world. And then after 10 or so years, it's going well and you leave and you go into this entirely new world, but not something that's easy for you. Like for me, for example, being on stage is not a big deal. I did it for many years as a public company CEO. So going on stage, I'm talking about ideas is sort of normal for me. But for you and for like many people, that it's a very scary thing. And you went and did it anyway. And then, you go into this industry like me. I didn't know anything about publishing. You go into this industry you don't know anything about. And now, you're all over the place with the coaching and doing great stuff and got a great, social media presence and blogging and writing and seem to be enjoying yourself. So my question for you is the same question I asked 20 years ago when I was starting as a CEO. For this new line that you're in, this new business, what you're doing today, what do you wish you'd done differently 3-4 years ago, or even 2-3 years ago?
That is such an easy question for me to answer because I am spending my time working on that stuff right now. So I launched here's the question. How many people do you think I had on my mailing list when I launched Limitless? Right? Book first, like I've written a book about transition from corporate to nonprofit work, but this is like my first like big idea book, hardcover, spring, like big idea book kind of thing. Launches at number 2 on the Washington Post bestseller list. How many people do you think I have had on my mailing list?
10,000.
Yeah, it's a trick question because I didn't have a mailing list.
Yeah.
Wow. I had maybe a social media following total between Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, none of which I really used other than Facebook, of maybe 4,000 people, maybe. So the book launches and suddenly it's a thing. Like I didn't expect it to be a thing. I mostly wrote the book because I found myself speaking on stages with like legit people like you. And I was like, well, these people all have books. I better get me one of them, right? Like it was one of those, I wrote a book about nonprofit work. So I was the quote unquote nonprofit girl. And PS, hot tip, nonprofits don't pay a ton of money for speakers all the time. So like, you don't want to be the nonprofit girl. And I wasn't speaking about nonprofits. So I had both a market problem and a marketing problem, my issue. So I kind of needed to write this book. So I wrote it. And then I got lucky. Completely lucky. Like, yeah, how was I successful in this book? I got lucky. And then I've spent the last year like backfilling the foundation under the house that suddenly I found myself living in. So what I wish that I knew a year and a half ago when Limitless came out is that you can't own luck. You can't own algorithm. You can't own like what's out in the ether. You can only own what you actually physically have. And I can physically have a list of email addresses. I can physically have clients with events who want to bring me in, who want to, book buy books. Like there are physical things that I can own. And rather than writing the next book and launching it, the next book that I want to put out is going to be called Wonder Hell. So rather than writing Wonder Hell and launching it to the now 7,500 people that I have on my mailing list, because I spent so much time, I wasted so much time trying to, invent what it should be, I'm going to build a mailing list to 50,000. And then when I get to that, I'll put out the evergreen book. But so that's mistake number 1, right? Is you gotta like actually figure out what you're trying to do and build your audience before you put the product out to the audience. Then mistake number 2 is that people generally are lazy and busy. And I want to like go all in and give people all the answers. So when Limitless came out, I was like, here's how I capture all the email addresses. I put together an assessment, limitlessassessment.com. Great. People are going to go there. 150 podcasts, national TV, Good Morning America, Today Show. Everybody go to limitlessassessment.com, and Limitless Assessment will tell you exactly how much calling, contribution, control, and contribution you want, and how much you have, and how much you need, and it's 67 questions. No, exactly. So I do all this work. 50,000 people go to limitlessassessment.com and 7,000 people finish it. Wah, wah. that's a huge amount of waste of time, of energy, of resources. So then I was like, well, my book is about 4 things. What if I asked 4 questions? So I just a month ago bought the URL my4questions.com, and now I have a 4-question quiz. So lesson number 1, build the audience before you release the product, right? So you can test it. You want to know if they like it. You want to know how they're going to receive it. So you have like a world. And then number 2, understand that people don't care about you and what you're doing. They're really busy. You have to make it super easy for them. So I think those are the 2 things I wish that I knew, because it would have, like, I would be in a very different place right now than I am. But now I know what to do for the next year while I work on the book to also build the foundation under the house. So
experiment and keep it simple. I love it.
yes, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, that's what I wish. That's what I wish. So when did you decide to write Loonshots? Because that's, again, like, you're academia, then consulting, then biotech, and now you're endlessly curious. You're asking all these questions. Loonshots is this combination of, like, science and history and incredible storytelling. But when did you decide you wanted to write it? And when did you decide you wanted to make it like a big book? Because I know you wanted to make it a big book.
I'll answer, and then we're going to go back to quid pro quo, right to you.
Can you stay on a little later? Because I think we're going to run out of time.
Yeah, no, or you come back again. This is, like I told you, it's kind of, I've done.
We'll just keep talking. It'll be a new show. It'll be like Conversations with Safi and Laura. Like that'll
work. You asked me about, like, what do you do when you're stuck? Let's say you've grown your business, because all of these questions it's the same answer that I'm going to get to you. And it's an answer that something that I came across maybe 10, 15 years ago. You asked for, you had grown your business to a certain point, and then you kind of got stuck. You wanted to keep doing new things, and your people just wanted to keep doing the same thing. How was it that I was, I got in a path where I was kind of doing the same thing, and then I made a change, and then, I went from academia to consulting, then I went from consulting to starting a biotech company, and then I went from starting a biotech company to writing, just like you did. How do you, what's the secret, or why do you do this, or what does it take to be successful in making these transitions? And I think I've got kind of one sort of secret sauce, the one secret sauce that I keep coming back to. And that insight came from when I came across an article about a physicist named Isidore Rabi, who won the Nobel Prize for work that he did related to particle physics. And somebody was interviewing him and asking him, what does it take to win a Nobel Prize? What did you, sort of typical questions. What was in your background that produced you, the Nobel Prize winner, from all these other Joes in the world? What did your mother do anything special? Well, tell us about your childhood. You could probably see him rolling his eyes at getting that question, but he gave a very interesting answer. He grew up in, I believe it was Brooklyn. I might be wrong, but he said, when I came home from school, public school, unlike most kids where their mother asks, what did you learn today? He said, my mother would ask me every day, did you ask any good questions today? And he said, I took that for my whole life. And if there was one thing that was behind why I won the Nobel Prize, is because I just kept asking good questions. Yes. And people sometimes ask me what I got from my parents. And I realized, having 2 scientists who were quite successful, I got that same idea. Just keep asking questions. You think nature works this way. You think the world is like this way. Let's go back a century. Everybody was sure that there's this thing called the ether, this kind of one frame of reference. Why? It's sort of obvious and intuitive. Like if you're moving relative to this something. Light is this oscillating electric and magnetic waves. Well, they're probably oscillating in some medium, just like water is a medium, and you have waves. So that medium is the ether. It's kind of obvious and it's pretty intuitive. Well, a young 25-year-old recent graduate, that bothered him. And actually, he was kind of obnoxious about it. He kept telling, he was a student and a graduate student. And he was telling his professors, "Hey, you guys are a bunch of idiots. This idea of an ether is sort of, it just, why does there need to be an ether? There's got to be a better way." And at the time, he was pretty young, and he actually didn't have a better way. And they were like, "Who are you? What's your name? What's your problem? Stop complaining." And he actually couldn't get a job, and that's why he ended up in a patent office. Where in 1905, he kind of finally figured out, I said, you don't really need an ether. You can do all of theoretical physics, explain what we see around us without an ether. And that's when a young Albert Einstein invented special relativity, among other things that he did in 1905. But asking good questions. That's how Isidore Rabi succeeded. That's how Einstein succeeded. Why do we really need that? Is there a way around that? That's the secret to making great transitions. And I found it was the secret for me. Whenever I start losing curiosity, which I did in physics and it plateaued for me, which I did in consulting and it plateaued for me. And then even as, running a company, the first few years, it's like, wow, this is amazing. You're a startup. And then, you're more mature. You're 100 or 200 people. And now we're like, whoa, we're getting close to going public. That's exciting. Oh, now we're publicly traded. And now you meet with portfolio managers and analysts. And the first couple of years of that is exciting. And then I found myself losing curiosity a little bit, which is not good. For me, that's the litmus test. When I'm losing curiosity in what it is that I'm doing, that's the litmus test. That's the sign that it's time to make a transition. And that's not true for everybody, but it's certainly true for me. But if you want to access that creativity, that wonder, that natural sort of childlike state where you're excited about everything around you, the thing to realize is that's not forced upon you. To be uncurious is not forced upon you. That's something that you can change. If you're not curious, that's not a sign that something is wrong with you or life sucks or it will never change. It's a sign that you need to go inside and, back to your consonants point, figure out what really aligns with what you care about, because that's what you'll be curious about. Like, so you talked about your transition after you'd started your company. You weren't curious about how to just keep managing and turning the cranks and getting revenue in the door 10 years in after you'd sort of figured out a bunch of stuff. What really turned you on and got you excited was doing things in new ways. And that was the same for me. So they're kind of related. The curiosity, what Isidore Rabi said, what Albert Einstein did, asking questions, persisting and asking surprising questions helps you tease out that consonants, what really matters for you, what you care about, what fires you up. And so all of my transitions came from asking questions until I found you don't know. No amount of theorizing. I have friends who buy this book. What color is your
parachute?
What color is your parachute or something? Fill out read this thing. This will tell you what job you should be in. No, there's absolutely no way. You just have to try a bunch of experiments, and then what you measure is how curious you are.
Yes.
If you're not curious, that's not the right place for you. It's not consonant in your language. It's not resonating. It's not bringing things together. And that changes with time. This one area was super exciting for me. Then this other area was super exciting for me. Then this other area. But it wasn't the same. It changed with age, with experience, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing now. And I think why you're doing what you're doing now. So that the secret power, the superpower, the magic is from asking questions and seeing internally, reaching inside and saying, am I really curious about the answer? And it's under your control. If you're not, try something else and keep looking until you are really curious.
Yeah, and I think it's different for everyone. Like some people want to just like how well can they do the same puzzle over and over and over, and I love that, and that's great. But like when COVID first hit and the pandemic started, and we were all locked inside, my 18-year-old was like, we should buy some puzzles. So we bought a puzzle and we did the puzzle. And then we bought a harder puzzle and we did the puzzle. And then we bought another harder puzzle and we did the puzzle. And then we got to the point where we're like, all right, let's get a harder puzzle, but not look at the box top. Put the box top away. So we have no idea what it's going to be. So then we did that puzzle. And then we're like, okay, we've done that. Now let's get two puzzles and combine them and put the box tops away and then do those. And then we were like, what if we got two puzzles by the same company so that the backs look exactly the same also and put the box tops away? Like the need to continue to challenge and learn new things and figure out new hacks, like that's what drives me. I think that's what drives you. But for some people, it's like, how can I do the regular puzzle, but just do it faster, right? Like they just want to do it differently. But I think there's a role that ego plays in this, and this will be our last question because I know we're at an hour at this point. But I read once the founders of Yahoo. The founders of Google were interviewed, and you'll relate to this. They said both your parents are academics. For each of you, do you credit that with your success doing what you're doing? And both of them said, actually, we're Montessori kids. And in Montessori, there's never a dead end. There's always additional questions you can ask yourselves. And the fact that they were trained as Montessori kids, and I'm a Montessori parent, the fact that they were trained in this mentality, this mindset that you just keep asking questions and you keep figuring out different ways to stack the blocks and count the beads and do these things, that's what they credit, is the curiosity that they were trained, that was ingrained into them through this Montessori method of teaching. But I think that there's also a role in ego that comes into it. Like you have to also feel like I'm worthy of getting the answers. I'm worthy of pushing myself for more. I can achieve this thing. That door is open to me. I have access to this thing. Like it can't just, if you have questions but you feel like you're not allowed to ask them, that doesn't help. So I'm curious if there were stories that you came upon in your research that from your own life where the fact that you had a solid ego and had that self-respect or was being pushed forward by other people or told it was okay, helped you to be able to continue to be curious and to continue to ask those questions.
Okay, I'll tell you a story from personal life, not
Cool.
business.
Awesome. Perfect.
And we'll close by turning it around, quid pro quo. You tell me, you answered the same question that I'm going to answer from your personal life. And so I'll tell you about how that same principle of curiosity and asking questions helped me in my dating life go from 14 years of single to finding the right person for me.
I thought it was just the $90 suit and the burrito.
It was the $90 suit. Yeah.
Wow.
All right. This is the digression. Speaking of that, but like I remember when
that's called a callback.
Speaking of that, I'll since this is just between you and me, right? Sure, nobody's gonna just probably between you and me. Okay. So when I was quite a bit younger, I was still pretty new to the dating world because I was a physicist and so on, and so not a lot of dating experience. And
what do they say? The odds are good, but the goods are odd.
Yeah, it was one of those. Although I did like sports and stuff, so I had, but those were the only two things I did: sports.
You were like a ranked tennis player. You had game, literally.
But I was very focused. I just did competitive tennis, which was of course guys, and you're competing in the male juniors, and then the science stuff that I did. So I didn't really discover dating until a little bit later. And I remember I was in Toronto for a summer at the university there doing some research project over the summer. And I met this very attractive girl and we had a really nice time. And I was leaving at the end of the summer to go back to school. And so I wanted to take her to someplace special for our last night dinner. And I noticed that they had a place there that I hadn't been to in a long time, that I really liked their food. And I think, and I told her a place that I really would like to take you to. I really like their food and I think you'll like it too. It's kind of American and we're in Toronto, but I think you'll like it. And she goes like, oh no, please tell me it's not. Because I think she had a good sense of my taste back then, or lack of. And so I take her, we drive up, and it's Kentucky Fried Chicken. I really like fried chicken.
Yeah.
And I thought it was awesome, and I was really kind of proud to show her. And we arrive in the parking lot, and she's like, that's what I thought. I was like, I really didn't know. Anyway, personal life, and then I would turn it back to you, how that power of curiosity helped you in a personal life thing. Dating, marriage, relationships, maybe even parenting. And for me, I'd been at Stanford and Berkeley in the Bay Area in California, and then I moved out to New York to start a job in consulting, and ended up staying in New York and commuting to Boston for 13 or 14 years. But that whole time, I was single and dating, and nothing really stuck for very long. And my parents were getting older. I was the oldest son. Speaking of Jewish mothers, Jewish fathers, they really wanted a grandchildren, and they're like, Safi, really? Enough of this. You abandoned science. That's a tragedy that we understand and have gotten over. It's been a very difficult few years for us. So, we've gotten over that, and you're sort of back in with this biotech thing. But
you could make it all up to us with a grandchild.
Set it aside.
Saying
Grandchildren. What is it? And I was like, I'm busy. And but it was the case that I was dating, and nothing was sticking. And I just kept dating, and not a lot, because I was really busy. And when you're running a startup, especially in the biotech, it's a roller coaster. So you have lots of people and responsibility, and that was my family. And so I didn't have a lot of bandwidth. And one question I maybe after 5-10 years, I started asking myself, why is nothing really sticking? And one question I started to realize is, a friend of mine helped me out, and it's like, well, you're really focused on this business of yours, this like roller coaster and this drug development and stuff, and you don't have a lot of bandwidth. Here's the thing about dating and women, they kind of like attention. So you may actually want to pay some attention, like, oh, that's a really interesting insight I'm learning at age 38 or whatever. That's so interesting. Women like attention. Actually, everybody does. I didn't know that. So I was like, oh, that's how human beings work. Got it. Okay, I see. Attention. Must do. Check. Right. But then I'd sort of learned that lesson. I actually enjoyed. I actually applied that to, the curiosity stuff. I just like to know what made people tick. Men, women, whatever. So that was just fascinating. I would learn all sorts about people's stories, but still this stuff didn't stick. And then I started asking myself, what is it that I really want? What's going wrong? And I sort of, just between you and me, I made a spreadsheet. Very geeky move. But like trying to figure out, like, is there something in the cause of the cause, this system? What am I doing? Because I actually would like children. My father was.
Can we put that spreadsheet in the show notes?
No.
Is it at least like framed and hanging next to the ketubah in your kitchen or something? Like,
no, I don't even know if my wife knows about it, because this is just between you and me, right?
Right, of course.
Okay, got it. So, I started to realize that there was, if I was honest with myself, there was something missing, that I wasn't back to, again, not to, keep pounding that table, your theme of consonants. Like, I was in Manhattan. I had a lot of friends in the arts world, fashion world, stuff that was kind of exciting on the surface. And it was sort of it's sort of like eating potato chips. There was a nice high the first minute you enjoy it. And then, after eating a whole bag of potato chips, you're like, what did I just do? Yeah. So there's sort of that contact high, which is like like junk food eating. It's sort of like junk dating. It's just sort of like a high. And I was like, I think I'm just going, doing that sort of thing. And I need to try something different, because that's just not me. I have this science core and curiosity and asking real questions. And I really don't care about fancy cars or PR or, stuff that a lot of people in that kind of community in New York cared about, making a ton of money and being on fancy boards and so on. I care about really original ideas and figuring out how things work, and the pleasure and the joy of figuring out how things work, and then doing that in a way that can make a difference for other people. And around that, how do I find something like that? So I started turning down like events that didn't fit with that, and started saying, well, maybe I should just spend more time with the few people I know who, may not be in New York, but seem to be more like that. And, maybe 6 months later, actually, I was at a cocktail event in New York, and I was talking to a guy, and it was an arts sort of thing, that the charity benefit of a colleague's daughter, theater, and it was all arts people, playwrights and stuff, some of whom were very interesting, and some I just had nothing in common with a lot of them. And so I was standing in line for a drink because I figured, well, that'll give me something to do, and maybe no one will talk to me, which will be great. And then the guy next to me says, oh, what do you do? Typical New York question. And I said, oh, I work in medical research, because nobody knew what biotech, at the time, nobody really knew what biotech was in Manhattan. So I was like, medical research. That's interesting. My ex-girlfriend does cancer research in Boston. I'm like, ding, 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 cancer research in Boston. That's what I do in Boston. My company was in Boston. And actually, this guy's like a really good-looking dude. He's, tall, and like his ex-girlfriend's probably pretty hot.
Right, because this is the point of the story where people were like, oh, he stopped hanging out with like the glitzy glamour, and he like went for some substantive ugly girl. And I've seen, like, I haven't met your wife yet, because we were going to have dinner before the pandemic hit. I've seen her. She's not a bowl of broccoli. Like, you're not, you did pretty well.
So
brains, beauty, a total package.
Yeah. So I was like, ding, 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 ding. That's interesting. How can I stalk this guy electronically online after this party and figure out who his ex-girlfriend is and arrange to meet her accidentally, in Boston? Because I found out that her, I knew her lab and of her lab, and
sure.
So little did I know, because I figured the next morning I'm starting to think about that. How do I do this? Because, what are the odds you meet somebody in a cocktail party in Manhattan and they tell you about their ex-girlfriend, they're going to introduce you, and you're like, yeah, right. That's going to happen. 10% left. So I start researching this, and then I get an email from this guy connecting me to his ex-girlfriend. And then I, 10 milliseconds later, hit, do Google search on that name, and this like model picture pops up with her. Some friend had taken like these, and it's like she looks like this unbelievable like model-esque thing, and like she's quite embarrassed about having those pictures up there. But it's like, that's a cancer biology PhD in Boston. Ding, 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 ding.
Every single person listening to this podcast now is now Googling Safi Bachall wife. Okay,
Oh no, not good. Anyways, I thought this is just between you and me, right? That's the right. Anyways, so that's how kind of asking good questions, also not stalking somebody electronically, but letting it happen naturally.
But asking yourself those good questions.
What was it that really matters to me? And it isn't like fancy cars or fancy clothes, as you might have guessed from the Men's Warehouse and burrito stuff. But that stuff doesn't matter to me. And what matters for me is, what I found in my wife, someone who really cares about science and the pursuit of truth and helping others. And it was just like, I had one, we were going to meet for 15 minutes for coffee. It turned into 5 hours. And then not much later, we were married. So that's how the power of asking good questions, what is working, what is not working for me, even in personal life, not just professional life, can make a big difference.
I love that. That's fantastic. Laura, I met my husband in a bar.
Quid pro quo. Well, I was going to ask you how, curiosity is help, but actually, I want the bar. Who picked up who? Quid pro quo.
Well,
how did that work? And what was your first thought when you met your husband?
So it's sort of a funny story, because My friend Gina and I used to always meet at this bar that was kind of halfway between both of our homes, our apartments, and we would always go out from there. So it was a bar called Madam's Organ in Adams Morgan in
What a
DC.
name.
And on there's like a giant, mural on the wall outside the bar of like this, like, beautiful, like Toulouse-Lautrec type, like red-haired, giant, buxom woman, which we now have had made into like we have a mural in our house that's like a bunch of different places, and the madam actually appears there. So we met at a bar called Madam's Organ, and my friend Gina she was sleeping with the bartender. And so by the time we would get from the line, from the front door to the bar, there was always be like a line of drinks. So it was like always a great place to start going out. Gina was managing the interns at the Corporation for National Service, which is where, we were starting to administer AmeriCorps. And there was a guy whose name was Mike Skonechny, who everybody called Sketch, who was an intern in our office. Well, Gina and I are sitting at the bar, and the line of drinks from the bartender she's sleeping with are like sitting in front of us, the shots, and Sketch comes walking over to say hello to Gina, and so he comes walking over to say hello to Gina. I walk over, John is with him. My husband is then, total stranger, but my now husband is with Sketch. So they come walking over. And I think the first words we exchanged were something like, "I'm sorry, I'm standing in between your legs." Something like that. And like, I mean, it was just one of those like weird, awkward, like you're at a bar and it's like a you're sitting on a stool, and like, it's just like this uncomfortable, like physical space. And my first reaction was like, who is this person who's like in an economics fellowship at the Fed? He's not even involved in politics. Like what is a person who's not involved in politics, right? Like I'm like working at the White House. Like, it's like, that was my entire world. It's like, who do you work for? What committee is your boss on? Like, what's its power structure? So my immediate thought was like, oh, he's cute, but like, whatever, I guess, fine. That night, we were actually supposed to go to another party where a guy that I'd kind of been dating was coming back from Indiana, where he was getting his PhD, and we were going to like re-link up. So like my whole idea was I was heading somewhere else that night. Like nothing. But for whatever reason, he just was interesting to talk to. The conversation flowed. He asked me to dance. One of his friends came over in the middle of dancing, and I think was trying to be like his wingman, and said something like, "Hey, John, you just hit the yuppie trifecta. You moved to Georgetown, you're working or you went to an Ivy League school, and you're driving a Saab." I think he was like trying to like, it was like said very loudly for my benefit. Later, of course, I find out that he had moved to Georgetown to live rent free because like the grandfather of one of his best friends had just died, and they were house sitting till the house was sold. He went to Yale on some student loans, but like tons and tons and tons of hard work that his parents had worked to make this possible. And he was driving a Saab that was like 10 years old, and the passenger window didn't roll up. So later I find out, whatever. I didn't really care necessarily, but I was a really good flirt. Like I could talk to anybody, anytime, about anything. I was good at the game, but I couldn't close to save my life. I was not a closer, but Gina was a closer. She was a good closer. So together we were really good. So at the end of the night, we're dancing. We never end up going to the other party. I'm standing there, and Gina comes up to me and John and says, "Hey, I think I'm ready to go home. Hey, John, you want to ride?" Because I had driven that night. "You want to ride?" And then she says, "But Laura, drop me off first because I live closer."
Huh.
Oh, I see what you're doing there. So we drop her off first. We drive to this house that John's renting, or that he's living in rent free. And it's this crazy Art Deco house in the middle of, old like Georgian homes in DC, and brick, the like columns and the bricks and all of that. And he's telling me the whole way there, it's like, it's the weirdest house. It's like this Art Deco house. You don't see anything like it. Every room's a different color. There's like a green room and a purple room and a pink room and a chartreuse room. And I was like, wow. I'm like, sounds interesting. And he says, well, all my roommates, we get there, we drive into the driveway, and he goes, all my roommates are moving in tomorrow. If you really want to see it, maybe you should come in tonight because I don't know if they're going to want guests.
Oof, what a good line. Wow.
Clearly, that's like the dumbest thing on the planet. But he will argue to this day that it just proves that if like someone's looking for a line, it doesn't matter what you say to them. They're like, okay, I'm in. We go into the house and we walk around and he's like, here's the pink room, here's the blue room, here's the chartreuse room. And I'm like, okay, great. And then he's like, you should come up to the roof because there's a beautiful view of all of Washington, D.C. And I'm like, great, here we go. Here's the money. Like the move. We go up to the roof. It's 32 degrees. It's like the end of March. And I am freezing. I'm getting nothing but older on this roof, right? It's like I'm flirting and I'm like flipping my hair and I'm like, oh, Otting, that's a German name. Gassner, my name, Gassner, German roots also. Like, I'm like trying to like where I work. I'm trying to like hint so he can like figure out how I'm leaning in. I'm laughing, all of it. Nothing. Finally, at like 3 a.m., I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll go. And we walk back downstairs and he walks me to the door and I stand on the porch of the door and he goes, all right, well, I guess I'll see you around sometime. And he closes the door.
Wow.
Click.
Wow.
So yeah, not a lot of game. The next day, his friend Sketch comes to pick him up from the house because, of course, he doesn't have a way to get home because I'd driven him. And he opens the door and Sketch is like, dude. And he's like, nothing. And he goes, dude, nothing. Dude. Gina shows up at my door, same exact conversation. But then he calls me up on the Tuesday and he's like, hi, this is Jonathan Otting. You may remember me from when Starlit Saturday Night passed. Blah, 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 blah. He asks me out. We go to a book reading. We go out for Indian food. The date turns into 6 hours and the rest is history. But I think I had to suspend like what I was looking for and what I thought was like the package of what the person, like they were going to be in politics. They're going to share the same things I do. They're going to be exactly this way and that way and whatever. And I fell in love with him because he was the smartest person I'd ever talked to. He was interesting. He was curious. He asked good questions. And it was like that right there, like the curiosity and just not putting on the front of the way things should look, but just like being and having the conversation and meeting somewhere where they are, I think is a really beautiful thing. But I think that starts from the having the presence, you know, the ego, the knowing who you are, what you want, what you're looking for, and then asking yourself the right question to figure out how to get there.
I feel like that's a good ending note. Awesome story. Enjoy talking to you, Laura. That was a lot of fun. It was just like sitting over coffee and here's my coffee.
Yeah.
Having a chat. Happy to do it anytime.
Absolutely. Well, this was great fun. It's crazy that the like only time we've gone to spend together is overseas when really you're just over the river in Cambridge.
That's right. That's
have
right.
to like, figure out how to do this. But thank you so much. For people who are listening, who are interested, I've been putting up the banner on the bottom about how people can find you. But for those who are just listening and not watching, how do people find you? How do they find your book? How do they learn more?
Well, you can buy it online anywhere. Loonshots. This is actually the new paperback. I kind of like the cover as they came up with this blue. I don't know if you can see that. That's how you spell the word. And you can just Google it or go to loonshots.com or I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn or whatever. And send me an email, Safi@Bahcall.com if you want. And that's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Laura.